Just for completeness, in our series on flying an approach, we want to cover the recommended ways of entering a pattern at non-towered airports. The AOPA has published a very nice article on this. You can Google that, AOPA non-towered airports. It'll come right up. And it has lots of extra information beyond what we're going to cover here, so it's worth the read and a pretty straightforward and easy read. One of the things that is included is some of the radio calls that you should be making at non-towered airports to let people know where you're at. We'll demonstrate a couple of these, but won't go into a lot of detail on all this. You can read about it in this publication. Once again, just Google AOPA non-towered airports and this should appear near the top of the list, if not at the very top. So we'll first talk about a standard recommended approach to enter a pattern. Here we show the pattern around the airport. We're going to be entering from outside of the pattern, and the standard entry is at a 45-degree angle to the downwind leg, somewhere around the midfield portion of the pattern. Typically you are a mile to a mile and a half away from the airport. You're paralleling the runway at the point where you intercept the downwind leg of the pattern. So between the intercept point and the point where you square away, you should be pretty much be midfield, and then you proceed parallel to the runway on out to your base leg. This image is a little foreshortened here. You probably would fly out at least about a mile or so. Farther, depending on how much traffic there is. You want to allow anybody coming in on final to pass you before you enter the base leg. That would be the first left-hand turn. So here we are, we're looking at Suburban Air Park, a little symbol all the way up here, and we're several miles away, and at this point we would be letting the traffic at Suburban know what we intended to do. And that would be a simple call out, first identifying who you are talking to, then saying who you are, and then what your intentions are, and then finally again identifying who you are addressing. As you continue into the pattern, you identify your location again. In this case, we would be stating that we are now entering the pattern, a standard entry midfield to the downwind leg, left-hand traffic. And some people refer to this as a left downwind. I think that's a little confusing because you're actually to the right of the field, the left referring to the direction of the turns you will take in the pattern. So here we've made the initial turn, which is a right turn, but all the turns now in the pattern will be a left turn. You can see we're a beam midfield, and we'll proceed on the downwind leg. Left-hand traffic for runway 21. If there is inbound traffic on final, you'll want to be sure to pass them while still on the downwind leg. Let them go past you, headed in the opposite direction obviously, before you make your turn to base. And as you make your turn to base, you would announce that you are doing so. Suburban traffic, Baron 5127 Golf, left turn to base, runway 21, Suburban. And that's the proper phraseology, who you are talking to, who you are, what you're doing, and then again, who you are addressing. So as we approach the extended center line of the runway, we make a left turn to final, and we would announce that. Suburban traffic, Baron 5127 Golf, 2-mile final, runway 21, Suburban. And simply at this point you would line up and make the landing. You may have noticed that there was a lot of looking around as we were in the pattern. The important thing is to watch for other traffic. In non-towered airports where there are no controllers, you are responsible for keeping an eye out for other traffic. If there's a risk of having a problem, you should take the appropriate steps to avoid running into another aircraft or having some other form of accident. So here we are, lined up, making our landing, runway 21 at Suburban. And once you're down, you can let folks know that you have cleared the runway, or if you're doing a touch and go, you would announce that also. So we'll take a look at what we just did. Came in, turned at a 45-degree angle about midfield, went on the downwind, turned left to base, and then came into final. You'll notice here at the scale that's a mile, the 1 mile, the top portion, and we were just a little bit more than a mile away, maybe a mile and a quarter, and we flew outbound on the downwind leg about 2 miles before we turned base to final. So here we have a diagram that shows what you should be doing when you're approaching from the opposite side of the field. Here you're going to fly the same pattern, left-hand traffic, but instead you're on the wrong side of the field here, if you will, for doing that. And again, this is the preferred entry. These are not hard rules, but they are the preferred and recommended ones. So you would come in from the opposite side and fly about 500 feet above pattern altitude. If there are larger aircraft involved at a given airport, you may want to make that 1,000 feet. You will have plenty of time to lose that altitude. So you overfly the airport at midfield, and then you continue out a couple of miles beyond the pattern. And I tend to make this about 3 miles myself, the pattern distance from the runway being about a mile to a mile and a half. Keeps me still within about 5 miles of the airport. You overfly the pattern, you fly outbound that couple of miles, and you turn around just as the diagram shows to enter at a 45-degree angle, a beam midfield. Now you can do the alternate, however not recommended method of crossing over the runway, and instead of flying outbound and turning around, simply turn directly into the pattern. You must yield to traffic in the pattern and traffic coming in through the standard 45-degree angle from the right. You would then proceed in the pattern as usual, but again, the recommended or preferred method is to overfly the field, fly outbound, turn around, and enter at a 45-degree angle, the same way we did when we were approaching from the right side of the field. So here we are, we're approaching Tipton Airfield, which is just a few miles from Suburban, and we're going to land runway 10, the end of which is on our left. So this will require us to fly across the airfield, approximately perpendicular to the runway, fly outbound 2 to 3 miles, turn around so we can enter using the standard 45-degree entry as we did before. So here we're crossing the field, and we'll turn a little bit to the left in order to make ourselves go pretty much perpendicular to the runway. We're a little bit of an angle here, and so as we cross we'll make a little bit of a turn to the left to make us perpendicular to the direction of the runway. So again, we fly outbound for 2 to 3 miles. At this speed we're doing a little bit more than 2 miles a minute, and there's that handy little device right there on your yoke of this aircraft called a clock, and that's all you need to do. You just need to time it, the speed, time it about a minute and a quarter, maybe a minute and a half, and once you're that far out, you'll be 2.5 to 3 miles away. That's my preferred. You can make it a little tighter than that, roughly 2 if you like. And strictly speaking, you would base the timing on the ground speed, but if winds are not much of a factor, since this is a estimate only, you can use the indicated airspeed to determine the timing of the outbound portion before you have to start your turn to come back to the airport. And when you do make your turn, you'll want to make a standard 2-minute turn, and nice gentle turn. And remember to keep a close eye out for traffic. You are close to the airport you're about to land at, and in this case we know there are several airports in the area, including the one that'll come into view in just a moment. That's Baltimore Washington International. It's unlikely we would be flying through here in their Bravo airspace, but they've given us special permission today. So BWI, or for those of you who remember Baltimore Friendship, and we're making just a standard turn to the right, which will bring us around nicely at a point where we can make that 45-degree entry. Again, keeping an eye out for traffic. Your head's pretty much on a swivel at all times when you're in a pattern. You always want to look out for aircraft that are coming in around you. Remember, you are close to an airport, so there's going to be other traffic. As we complete our turn, we keep an eye out for the airport, and as it comes into view, you'll notice that we're lined up to come in at a nice 45-degree angle to the downwind leg, just as we did when we approached from the pattern side of the airport in the first landing we did. We'll take a look at this on plan G. Here we flew outbound and making our turn back, and we're roughly, I would say, about 4 miles away from the airport at the top of that turn. So you get about a mile and a half for your pattern distance, and then about another 2.5 miles or so, or 3 miles in addition to that. But again, your preference, but I believe it's good practice to stay within about 5 miles of the airport. So again, we've lined ourselves up nicely. This technique really does lend itself to putting you right where you want to be. And we're entering the downwind leg at a 45-degree angle, and when we roll out, we'll be at approximately midfield. Keeping an eye out for traffic. This is one of the danger points in a pattern. When you're first making an entry, there are people that are doing non-standard entries. Remember the one we talked about coming across the field, but others include a straight in to the downwind leg. If you were approaching this runway from the east, some pilots will come straight into the downwind leg without moving themselves over to enter at a 45. It is technically allowed, but not considered good practice. So here we are, beam midfield, just as before. We'll fly the downwind leg outbound. We'll watch for traffic on final. Make sure that you first pass any traffic on final before you turn base. That will ensure that you have adequate spacing with anybody that's landing. Again, keep a close eye out. Remember that as you turn, you're not going to be able to see well out of the right side of the aircraft. Your wing's going to be up above you. High wing aircraft, the left wing will drop down and block your view. Either way, one side or the other is going to be blocked, so you need to make sure you scan for other traffic before you start your turn. So here we've made our turnaround, come in at a 45-degree angle, and now we're turning base as we did before, and keeping an eye out for traffic at all times, because there are some folks that will enter the final straight in. Again, definitely not a recommended procedure, but it does happen. So you keep an eye out for those folks, and remember, when you make your left turn to final, your right wing's going to go up and block your view, so anybody coming straight in is a real risk to you. Again, this is one of the danger points in a pattern. So as we approach the extended center line of the runway, we make the left turn to final and line up with the runway, just as we did before. Again, the final approach is usually made between 1 mile and 2 miles out in an aircraft like this. Light twins usually a little farther than something like say a Cessna 172, which can actually fly a fairly tight pattern. Obviously, larger aircraft will require more room, and you may need to adjust your pattern leg lengths for other traffic in the pattern in order to provide adequate clearance. So once again, we're lined up on the runway, and we'll complete our landing touchdown runway 10 here at Tipton. And as in the pattern, you can announce where you're exiting at and also advise when you're clear of the runway. So come and visit us if you like at Elite Premier Virtual, www.elitepremiervirtual.com. And if you register on our website, you'll have access to several areas, linked to our instructional videos, including this one, and some other training materials that are available to you. We cover ATC communication basics, IFR flight planning, reading an approach plate, along with a little old school stuff with VOR and NDB navigation using the ADF, and a specific section on non-precision approaches. So come pay us a visit. We have regular activities, and we'll be happy to have you join us, and we'll help you out any way we can. So thanks for watching.